Those of you who are willing and able, please stand for the singing of the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far all the way, Thou who hast by Thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met Thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee. Shadow beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our name.
We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us into distrust of all white people, for many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always be much ahead. We cannot turn back.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Mayor Moreau Weinberger, and it is a pleasure to welcome all of you here to City Hall and to once again have a role in this really important and long-standing Burlington tradition of remembering and celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I don't remember us having this event here in City Hall before. It's great to have you all here and for the city to be able to participate in this way. I want to thank Patrick Brown, the founder of the Greater Burlington Multicultural Center and the creator of this event. You know, Patrick has been doing this now for a long time. He first started getting us together in this way in the early 1990s, and he has brought just a remarkable group of talented speakers here, year after year, since the early 90s. He's done it again today with not one, but two great speakers who we're going to get a chance to hear from in a moment. But before that, I did just want to say to Patrick, since this is the last time I'm going to get to participate in this event as mayor after 12 years of service, I want to say to Patrick, I can't see where he's went. Where'd you go, Patrick? There he is in the back. Patrick, thank you. Thank you for Patrick, I think maybe best known in some ways for this event. It's become such a important part of the annual Burlington calendar. But he is also there for the city. He's also been there for me in so many other ways, whether it's serving on the committee that's searching for a new police chief, or whether it is serving as an advisor to the mayor's office as we're making decisions about racial equity and racial justice, or just being there to pick up the phone in a moment of challenge. Patrick has been there for me in so many ways that I'm grateful for, and he has been there for this whole community, bringing us together and making this place an even better place to raise all of our children. So again, Patrick, thank you. Speaking of children, I do want to say how happy I am that my daughter Ada is able to join us here today, as well as my wife Stacy. This event, Ada's been to many of these, and it's been an important part of growing up in Burlington for her. This year, as we gather, we are once again getting together at a difficult time. We have wars being waged in Europe, in the Middle East. This week, the voting begins once again on a presidential election that, again, seems to many of us like American democracy itself is hanging in the balance. And here in Vermont, we see every day the effects of unprecedented levels of homelessness and a drug crisis that continues to worsen and grow. In short, this is a moment where we need the inspiration, the passion, and the vision of Dr. King more than ever. Later on, in the program, we are going to hear from Ambassador Suzan Cook, who I first met on a long plane ride a couple of years ago, and it's always a little risky to start talking to the person in the seat next to you, but as you will all see in a few minutes, Ambassador Cook is full of enthusiasm, experience, stories from her time in the Obama administration and other leadership roles, and I am very excited that chance meeting played a role in bringing the ambassador here to Burlington today. So welcome, Ambassador. We're excited to have you here. This is also one of those exciting times when we have another mayor here in City Hall, and that is Mayor Ashton Hall from the city of Talladega, Alabama. So, you know, Mayor Hall's on the kind of the other end of the mayoral spectrum here. He's just was elected 4 months ago in a runoff election at the age of 22, which makes him... You know, I used to think I was kind of a young mayor, but not feeling that way right now. He is not only the youngest mayor in Talladega's history, but in Alabama history. He campaigned on building community as well as continuing to grow the city, attract new businesses to it, and he not too many mayors can say this, he brings the perspective of being an educator to the office as well, serving not only with his important mayoral duties, he's also a third grade teacher. So, Mayor Hall, we're really excited to have you here today. Welcome.
I'm 22, but I had to be careful with them steps when I stepped up. Good afternoon. To Mayor Weinberger, thank you for that great introduction. To all of our elected city and state officials who are gracing us with their presence this afternoon, I want to thank you for being here and welcome you as well. To Ambassador Cook, thank you. Just had a delight in meeting you over these past couple hours and getting to know you, and look forward to future collaboration with each other. To my guy, Mr. Patrick Brown, who has made all this possible, who has came down to little old Talladega to get me to come up here to Vermont. I want to thank him for the invite, and I look forward to future collaboration with him as well. I do not believe in speaking long, so I won't be before you long. I'm just excited to hear what Ambassador Cook has to bring for us after me. But let's get into it. I want to have a statement that says, look where he brought us from. Anytime I speak, I like to give a topic or a statement to think on. Look where he brought us from. Today, we are here to commemorate the greatest of all time, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., a powerful civil rights leader who changed not only this nation, but the world. We have witnessed many injustices since the demise of Dr. King in 1968, but we are far from where we were. The lyrics of an old gospel song rings in my spirit as I speak to you all today. Look where he brought us from. He brought us out of darkness into the marvelous light. Look where he brought us from. I mention these lyrics because even though I'm a young man, I too reap the benefits of Dr. King's work over 50 plus years ago. I am able to walk into an integrated elementary school every single day, teaching all ethnicities how to do math. 60 plus years ago, a black man in a predominantly white town teaching their kids the mere functions of mathematics would be just a dream. That brings me to a quote that I love from Dr. King, I Have a Dream speech. He says, I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with his vicious racists, with his governors having his lips dipping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right down in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. However, Dr. King did not bear this cross alone. There are several civil rights figures that assisted him and also lost their lives, such as Reverend Medgar Evers, murdered in his driveway in front of his wife and kids in rural Mississippi. Malcolm X, who was killed in front of his people who he ministered to during Mass. Emmett Till, a young man castrated, beat, shot, and had cement blocks put on him and thrown in the river. Dr. Charles R. Drew, driving back from a meeting at Tuskegee Institute, wrecked his car, and all he needed was a blood transfusion, which he created, was told they didn't serve Negroes, refused to accept him, and he died. These are the people that lost their lives due to the injustices of a segregated country. I gave those examples to support my topic, look where he brought us from. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. It's what I grew up hearing the elders at my church singing during Black History Month. I never knew the real meaning of this song until I got older. African Americans were not free in their own home. One of my close friends told me a story his grandfather told him about Dr. King in the early 1960s. He said in those days, the main highway was Highway 78, which stretches from Georgia, Alabama, and through Tennessee. His grandfather grew up in the house right off that highway. His parents and siblings gathered around the radio listening to the whereabouts of Dr. King. His mother prepared a few sack lunches because along that highway wasn't many places they could stop to get food. She sent he and his brothers to the road to give them food as they passed along the way. He said that Dr. King was so grateful of the kind act. Look where he brought us from. I can go along that same highway today and stop at any establishment I want and be served. Dr. King's brave acts of kindness is the reason I am able to be a free black man in rural Alabama and not be discriminated against today. The Bible quote that comes to my mind as I think of Dr. King is 1 John chapter 4, verse 4. It says, "Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world." This was a God thing. The black church was the steeple of the civil rights movement. Their churches were the hubs for meetings such as Thurgood CME Church in Birmingham, Alabama, Dexter Memorial Missionary Baptist Church, Montgomery, Alabama, Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, where Dr. King's family were members of, and years later, after his assassination, his mother was gunned down during a service while she was playing the organ. 16th Street Missionary Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, where it was bombed and 4 children were killed on September 15, 1963. These churches are now National Civil Rights Historical Landmarks. Not only the buildings were utilized, the pastors came together as well. Reverend Ralph Abernath, Reverend Jess Jackson, Reverend Abraham Woods, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth are a few to name. These men were locked up and faced threats. Homes were bombed, and their families' lives were put in jeopardy. Their faith never wavered. So again, I say, look where he brought us from. As we stop to commemorate the life and legacy of this young man who laid down his life for his people, we ask the question, how far have we come? Maynard Jackson, soon after the civil rights movement, became the first African-American mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, to a city Dr. King grew up in, and now is one of the top cities in America. The airport there is also named after him, Jackson Hartsell Airport, the busiest airport in the world, seated right there in Atlanta, Georgia. Schools became integrated across the country. Women of all races gained their rights to work, vote, and have equal voice. In 1979, in one of the most racist cities in America. Birmingham, Alabama elected their first African-American mayor, Richard Arrington, who served for 20 years. Colin Powell was the first African-American Secretary of State. Condoleezza Rice was the first female African-American Secretary of State and the first woman to serve as National Security Advisor. President Barack Obama, the first African-American president in the history of this country. This is evidence of how far we have come. I'm going to end by saying the last line in Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands in singing the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Look where he brought us from. Turn to the person next to you and say, neighbor. Turn to the person next to you and say, neighbor, he has brought me freedom. Hey, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm here to present the awards today. So the Greater Burlington Multicultural Resource Center offers community recognition for the Howard Center. Thank you for your tireless commitment to racial justice and equity for the community of Burlington and the state of Vermont. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Remembrance.
Service is what today is all about. There are so many who need to be served, but there are too few to serve them. But the service of some can inspire the service of others. So it's up to us to continue our service so we can serve others and they can serve others. So thank you.
Next, community recognition for City Market Onion River Co-op. Thank you for your tireless commitment to racial justice and equity for the community of Burlington and the state of Vermont. Community recognition for Rep. Kevin Coach Christie. Thank you for your tireless commitment to racial justice and equity for the community of Burlington and the state of Vermont. Community recognition for Reverend Dr. Arnold Thomas. Thank you for your tireless commitment to racial justice and equity for the community of Burlington and the state of Vermont.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Lene,
I'm Zaylee.
I'm Daviana.
and we're part of the Beaufort Trio. There are those who are asking, the devotees of civil rights, when will we be satisfied?
We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality.
We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies heavy with the fatigue of travel.
Cannot gain lodging in the motels of highways and the hotels of the cities.
We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating,
For whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he's nothing for which to vote.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of the great trials and tribulations.
Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells.
And some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered.
By the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality.
You have been the veterans of creative suffering, continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive.
Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina.
Go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana.
Go back to the slums of the ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation will and can be changed. Thank you.
Today, as we continue the grand tradition of celebrating the legacy of the late Dr. King, I'd like to thank you all for coming and joining many around the country and indeed the world in observing this historic mark. None of this would be possible without the ongoing generous support of community partners, M&T Bank, Key Bank, Champlain Housing Trust, Ben & Jerry's, Howard Center, City Market, Fletcher Free Library, and many others. Congratulations to the honorees today. On July 16, 2020, Howard Center was part of a declaration that says systemic racism is a mental health, is a health emergency. We are proud to recognize Howard Center today. They have a diversity, equity, and inclusion cabinet that spans far beyond the reach of their community and doors that they serve. City Market acknowledges, respect, and work untiringly to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in their workforce and in diverse food offerings. We are very proud of City Market also, Onion River Co-op, for the work and the intentional inclusivity that they have projected in the many, many years. Representative Christie, in his many roles, serves as a trustee at the University of Vermont. He is chair of the Vermont Human Rights Commission. He is a school teacher
and he has worked untiringly to promote legislative bills and proposals to further the cause of racial justice, inclusion, and equity in our state of Vermont. Retiring pastor of the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, Dr. Arnold Thomas. Dr. Thomas has been in the forefront of this fight for racial justice. He continues to moderate a webinar that speaks to inclusivity for all, to ensure that every one of us have access. My next comment is CASE, the origins of our discontent. A wonderful book by the great Isabel Wilkerson. This has been, Ava DuVernay has now made this into a documentary. It has already premiered in Italy and will hit the big screens in the United States on January 19th. Ms. Wilkerson has agreed to appear virtually here in Burlington, Vermont, speaking to Vermont citizens. And so April 29th, we will present Ms. Wilkerson at 6 p.m. in the Grand Ballroom at the Hilton Hotel. It will be a very in-demand and historic moment because this is when, and the movie is going to premiere here on January 19th, and that will give you a lot of time, if you haven't learned or read her book, CASE, to go out and get that book. It's very, very intentional to speak to the minds and the hearts of everyone like Dr. King did. Before her passing, the great Coretta Scott King, widow of the late Dr. Martin Luther King, sent a letter to us here in Vermont. And I'm going to read an excerpt from that letter addressed to the people of the state of Vermont. It says, "Your multicultural celebration of Martin Luther King's life and legacy and your commitment to community service throughout Vermont is key to honoring this holiday and to help to fulfill his dream. In celebrating Martin Luther King Jr., we want to continue to identify and indeed respect principles and trust among the people of Vermont. The beloved community of Vermont, celebrating my husband's dream, will become a vibrant reality. We appreciate your continuing commitment to fulfill the dream and the work and the ideals of Dr. King. I read this letter because with us today in the audience is a dear friend of Coretta Scott King, a family friend and a personal friend. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome Suzan Johnson Cook.
Thank you so much. And 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be 67. So I wasn't even going to attempt those stairs. I was like, oh no, baby, we ain't going there. And so Mr. Mayor and Mr. Mayor, to all of the electeds and appointeds, and to all of those who serve, to our honorees, and to all of you, I greet you with joy. Mr. Mayor, thank you for having us in your house. Who would have thought that a plane ride from Rome would lead to Burlington. So I am so delighted to be here in 0-degree weather. Thank you so much. And to all the honorees, we salute you for your service and your work. And so we hope to take a picture with you at the end of this because you have done mighty work for us. To all your excellencies and everyone who's made this possible, thank you. I know you stood before, but there's an amazing man who's coordinated this for 30 consecutive years, even during COVID. And won't you give it up one more time for Mr. Patrick Brown? Thank you, Patrick. And while you're standing, I'm learning this social media. I just need you while you're standing. If you're able to stand, I want you to say greetings from Burlington, Vermont. I'm going to give you a 3, 2, 1. We're going to practice 3, 2, 1. Greetings from Burlington, Vermont. See, that's how I thought you were going to do it. I need a little animation. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Greetings from Burlington, Vermont. Woo, thank you. So Mayor Hall said he was going to be short and sweet. That's because he's 22. I want a minute for every year old that I am, okay? I'm a Baptist preacher, so we can be here till Monday, okay? That's the official holiday anyway. So, no, just kidding, just kidding. This is one of my favorite celebrations. It was the first African American whom we celebrated and had a holiday for. So I grew up in the 60s and the 70s in integrating time. My brother and I were integrating a neighborhood, integrating schools, and it's because of Dr. King and the work of those others that Mayor Hall talked about. It was a big deal to buy our first home in the Bronx, New York. Ours was a row house, meaning there were lots of houses in a row. And we were all attached neighbor to neighbor. We could hear everything on each side of the walls. But it was an exciting time. And in many black homes in New York City and around the country, we had what was called a finished basement, meaning that the contractors were down there, they put some stuff up on the walls, and we could have parties and do a lot of stuff in the finished basement. We had a record player, and if you don't know what that is, that means you were not born. We played 45s. 45s were these vinyl round records that had the label of the production company, and inside that you put a little plastic disc, and then you put it on a record player, and then you would put a dime on the needle so the record player wouldn't skip. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And we played Motown, mainly Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross and the Supremes. Guess who was Diana Ross? Stop. In the Name of Love. We played The Temptations and Marvin Gaye. And then upstairs in our living rooms, there were photos on almost every black home. There was RFK, JFK, and Martin Luther King. They were our blessed trinity, justice seekers, world and game changers, young men who died, many said, far too soon. So I was 11 years old, and my mother and I were on the way to one of the first shopping malls in New York City. It was called Cross County Shopping Center. And the news of Dr. King's death came across the radio. And my mother brought the car to a screeching halt, and then made a U-turn, and we went back to the block where I lived, and where she normally parked, neighbors were out in the street in droves. Black and white, men and women, Italians, Jews, Caribbean, Southerners, all in what I call a human bonfire, hugged together, crying hysterically and uncontrollably, because Dr. Martin Luther King, our hero, was gone. So today I want to speak about gone, but not forgotten. And I want to speak about the multidimensionality of this singular individual who changed and impacted, who charged us, who made a difference in this world, reminding us that one person can indeed, when surrounded by the right people, make a difference and change our world. So I'm going to talk about Martin the man with a mission. Martin the man with a movement, Martin the man of magical words and oratorical genius, and the monument now dedicated to Martin. Martin the man. My parents were from the South. They started this life's journey in what's called the Jim Crow South, where racism was evident every day of their lives. They started as sharecroppers, picking cotton and tobacco in the fields, but made it to the north, to New York, and built wealth. They were Afro-Americans, and they were Afrocentric. Proud black civil servants by day, and building a family-owned business by night, which is still the longest-running black family-owned business in New York State. And in our home were libraries, filled with books. There was what was called the Negro Encyclopedia, the books of and by civil rights leaders such as Bayard Rustin, who was one of the writers for Dr. King, and Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, who's one of the lieutenants for Dr. King. And all the books written by and about Dr. King were in this library. By day, my mother was an elementary school teacher, and so we started reading very early. And whatever her students got for homework, I had to do my homework and theirs. And there were discussions around our kitchen table about civil rights issues. So often I'd go back down to our finished basement and I would slide this panel that housed our home library, and with my elementary education, I was able to read many of his books and look at the pictures of this wonderful man and the legends who surrounded him. I was intrigued by him. And so in third grade, my parents took me to Hunter College, where Dr. King was speaking, and Mrs. King was right by his side. After Dr. King finished speaking, he was able to bend down. It was an auditorium with an auditorium about this size on the stage, and he shook my hand. And then afterwards, I wrote Mrs. King a letter. Third grade, to which she replied and signed it in her own handwriting. Sent it to 234 Sunset Avenue, Atlanta, Georgia. Fast forward years later, as a college student, I became best friends with their eldest daughter, Yolanda, who lived at that same address where I received the thank you letter from. And when we'd hang out in Atlanta, I was invited to stay at that same home from which the reply came to my letter. And I became Mrs. King's other daughter, as she liked to call me publicly. And through his widow and through their eldest daughter, and staying in the home where he was from, I learned a lot about Martin the man, the husband, the uncle, the brother to Mrs. Christine Farris, who just recently passed about 3 months ago. And often I would lie across the bed and try to channel what it must have felt like in that room. The father, who had a bomb in his home when my friend Yolanda was only 2 months old, thought about the hatred that was so strong that they'd come into his home and try to take his family out. The man who liked to listen to records and be with Harry Belafonte and sometimes be able to dance, and the man who had more than a dream, who had thoughts and wishes and wants and wisdom, the man who loved his family. But also a man who sometimes experienced isolation and sometimes loneliness and wiretaps from the FBI. And not only were there celebrators, but there were haters, some who didn't understand him, his eloquence, his giftedness, that man, the human. This past week on Thursday night, I was at the Ascend Aspen Institute in DC with an author who recently wrote a book about Dr. King. His name was Jonathan Egg, who wanted our audiences to know the humanness of Martin the man. But then there was Martin with a mission, a divine mission, which had him now have a global family. Those of us in ministry or from a faith tradition describe it as a divine assignment, a purpose from God, that he was born for that moment, this time in history, to do exactly what he did with the power and the spirit that he did it, to have the courage that he had. And so at age 15, graduated high school, and he's on the campus now of Morehouse College. He was already making an impact with students and teachers alike, very much like the story in the New Testament that we read about Jesus, where the Rabbonis, the teachers, surrounded him, and they gathered as they did with Jesus, and he learned from them the academics, but he also taught them and led them, learning from people like Gandhi and Howard Thurman. He had a moral compass that would guide him as a man with a mission, a man with integrity, a man who was the son and a grandson of a pastor who instilled in him great values in him, but even they could not walk in his shoes because this was something he was designed and destined to do because he had a mission. And when you are spirit-driven, you're listening to a different voice and marching to the beat of a different drummer. I remember when Hebrew National Frank's commercial used to come on, and they said, yes, we were made in factories, but we listen and answer to a higher authority. And that's really what Martin was doing. He was answering to a higher authority that we in the religious world call a calling. But then there was Martin, who led a movement. His mission and the movement were intertwined because the civil rights movements birthed in the basement and the pews, as Mayor Hall told us, of black churches. And so as a black pastor, he's now 26 years old, on a day when there was a Poor People's Campaign march, and they called for this new pastor in town, and reluctantly he went, but when he started speaking, he was like E.F. Hutton, and everybody wanted to listen. And people listened to this inspiration and to this information and to this transformation. And all of a sudden, a boycott began in Montgomery. And at the center of this movement was a man named Martin Luther King, this young man, Martin. And then later there were Rosa Parks and others whose names we won't even know in the history books or in the headlines, but who were integral to the movement. John Lewis, and those whose names were called by Mayor Hall, some of the names who didn't immediately make the headlines until they were gone. And there were Jewish leaders and there were Greek Orthodox leaders who marched across the bridge with them. And this movement started, led by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Mrs. Coretta Scott King invited me to preach the last service. She was present at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. When I arrived at the airport, she insisted that I have his and her entire library. She kept calling because she sent her niece to pick me up, and she says, is she here yet? And Angela said, yeah, I'm bringing her over. She said, I need to see her, and she gave me every single book he wrote, every single book she wrote, and she signed them. And in her book called The Words of Martin Luther King, selected by Coretta Scott King, she chose these words as she spoke about the movement, specifically the Montgomery bus movement and boycott. Now we're talking about there's no social media, there's no emails, there's no LinkedIn, there's no text messaging. All they had were mimeograph machines. Anybody remember mimeograph machines? Your hands would turn purple and you crank one out at a time. But somehow he gets the message out. And he says this: there comes a time when people get tired of being trampled by oppression. There comes a time when people get tired of being plunged in the abyss of exploitation and nagging injustice. The story of Montgomery is the story of 50,000 such Negroes who were willing to substitute tired feet for tired souls and walk the streets of Montgomery until the walls of segregation were finally battered by the movement and by the forces of justice. So he really had no choice but to lead the movement. Our people were counting on it. He was the God-given one led to lead this movement. He was the man for the job. Which leads me now to Martin with his magical words and oratorical skills and genius. No one could say it like Martin. Nobody could write it like Martin. I've been to the promised land, and I've seen the lightning flashing, and I heard the thunder roll. And as he quoted words of songs and scriptures, he had a way to add a cadence and a rhythm that got hands to clapping and feet to stomping and folks to swaying and shouting, almost like a song, but not a song, almost like a poem, but not a poem. He was speaking sermons and speeches with a call and a response. He'd speak and they'd say, I hear you, Martin. He'd speak and they'd say, oh, Martin, we're with you. He'd say, how long? They say, not long. How long? Not long. And he would continue on until the crowd was with him. And then he would say things like, all of us are inextricably juxtaposed. He said all men are, in that time they used just men, but all men are interdependent. Every nation is an heir of vast treasury of ideas and labor to which both the king and the dead nations have contributed. He said, we are everlasting debtors to known and unknown men and women. When we rise in the morning, we go to the bathroom, and when we reach for a sponge, it's provided for us by a Pacific Islander. When we reach for soap, it's created by a European. Then at the table, we drink coffee, which is provided for us by a South African, or tea by a Chinese, or cocoa by a West African. And if I were there, I would say, Dr. King, to that I'll add, we put on our waffles and pancake syrup by Vermonters. He says, before we leave for our jobs, we are already beholden to half the world. And he later says, our destinies are tied together. Speaking of black and white America in a multiracial society, he says, no group can make it alone. There is no separate path to power and fulfillment. We must intersect with our roots. So last year, this time, I was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And my host there took me up to Salt Lake City's mountains. And as we were driving, he said, you know, there are the aspen groves. And I asked him about the aspen groves. And so the aspen groves are the longest living organism in America. There are trees that grow up tall, but it's the roots that make them aspen groves. Because the roots, no matter what you do to the trees, they just get tighter and tighter. You can't stop them from growing. They intertwine so much that the more you cut and chop off, the more they get tighter and they're intertwined. And that's the kind of intertwinedness Martin Luther King was talking about. And so from his famous mountaintop speech, he says, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter to me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go to the mountaintop, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That was his last speech in April 1968. And now in Washington, D.C., there is a monument to Martin Luther King, which sits on the tidal basin where the cherry blossoms blossom annually, bloom annually. And it's close to where he led hundreds of thousands on the March on Washington, where blacks and whites and Jews and Christians, my own parents marched with him, and perhaps some of yours marched together for justice and for economic equity and to alleviate the pains of America's what he called a bounce check. You can see that sculpted face and body erected of a man who was my hero. And so often I pass by there and I think to myself, what would Dr. King say now? Using a familiar title from his book, he said, where do we go from here? And the subtitle is Chaos or Community. I imagine while he's standing there, he's thinking about a few miles away, the first black and youngest governor of Maryland, Wes Moore. If he could see from behind his head, he would think about the youngest mayor of Talladega. He'd go over to the White House, and he sees sitting in the vice president's seat a woman of African and Asian descent, Kamala Harris. But I believe at the same time he has joy, he's also commiserating that on the steps and inside the U.S. Capitol that was built by black slaves, there was an insurrection incited by a president of the United States. He's probably wondering, where do we go from here? Chaos or community. He's probably trying to ask Congress, when are y'all gonna pass some legislation for voting rights? Not an act that has to keep being renewed and new, but legislation that every American can have voting rights. He's probably wondering, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Wondering why there's so many black men in jails. He was in a jail, but he wrote his letter from a Birmingham jail knowing that he would be bailed out sooner or later, but there's so many black men in jails on life with their hands cuffed and their feet cuffed. I imagine he's wondering, where do we go from here? Well, here today we stand on the shoulders and must continue the great legacy and not be defeated, not be discouraged. We've got to go forward and grow and flow together. Like those potholders we used to make in elementary school. Anybody remember potholder? You took one horizontal and you weaved it, and then one vertical and you weaved it, and you kept on going until everything was interwoven until you had a what? A potholder. So you must weave what you've got, and I've got to weave what I've got. And we've got to be like those beautiful fall leaves of Vermont or those aspen groves in Utah, which I told you about. And we got to blossom like those cherry blossoms even when the season is off. And we must become kinder and sweeter like the syrup you're world-renowned to do. He's probably reminded of his own words, that when an individual is no longer a participant, when he no longer feels a sense of responsibility to his society, the control of acrimony is emptied. And when future is degraded and vulgarity enthroned, when the social system does not build security but induces peril, inexorably the individual is impelled to pull away from a soulless society. I imagine that's what Biden was talking about when he said we're fighting for the soul of our nation. I think we're not only soulless, but sometimes we're spineless. And so the one thing that's standing strong is this monument, perhaps to remind us not only of a great man who walked this earth with heart, mind, spine, and soul, but to remind us to open our eyes that we've got our work to do. His mission was for his time, but we must continue that mission. A sister poet named Carol Etzler wrote this poem and reminds us of our words. She says, sometimes I wish my eyes hadn't been opened. Sometimes I wish I could no longer see all of the pain and the hurt and the longing of my people and me as we try to be free. Sometimes I wish my eyes hadn't been opened just for a moment, how sweet it would be not to be struggling, not to be striving, but just to sleep secretly in our slavery. But now that I've seen with my eyes, I can't close them, because deep inside me, somewhere I'd still know the road that my people and I have to travel. My heart would say yes, and my feet would say go. Sometimes I wish my eyes hadn't been opened, but now that they have, I'm determined to see that somehow this day, my people and I will be the people God created us to be. Dr. King, the man with the mission and the movement and the magical oratorical words, has done his part. And our eyes now must not only be open, but remain open, not like the monument that never closes, but that sees beyond even what the human eye should see. We must see with a vision of victory. And so for the remainder of this time, We must, as Maya Angelou says, not live a nightmare thinking we're living a dream, but live a dream and shut down the nightmare. Dr. King left us a dream. And today we've got to say, let us rise up with an even greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move into these next powerful days, because the ultimate measure of a man or woman, as he said, is not where we stand at moments of comfort and convenience, but where we stand at times of challenge and controversy. Let's not just leave here saying she gave a good speech, and I did. But let's leave here lifting up what Dr. King stood for and gave his life for. Sometimes it's inconvenient, but we can make a difference. I'm Suzan Johnson Cook, and I approve of this message.
Wow. Ambassador Cook, Mayor Hall, the world asks a lot of you that you chose to spend your time this weekend leading us, sharing your wisdom, sharing your grace. It means more than you can know. We thank you. Mayor Weinberger, thank you for hosting us, this incredible event. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you to Stacy and your family. I know that service calls on the entire family, so thank you for. I want to thank Ms. Felicia Moore for this beautiful musical tribute, Thomas Clary, our student presenters who shared the words of Dr. King so we could hear them through new voices. I want to offer my gratitude and recognition to Pastor Arnold Thomas, Representative Kevin Coach Christie, Howard Center City Market, who were celebrated for their work, decades-long work. I want to thank again Dr. Patrick Brown and the Greater Burlington Multicultural Resource Center. And this might be the third time we thank you, but I hope that our love as a community can seep through, because I know sometimes it's hard to feel. So one way I came to understand Dr. King's legacy was through his impact and Coretta Scott King's impact on the farm workers movement in California. Cesar Chavez and Dr. King never met. But years after Dr. King's death, Cesar gave a talk about what he learned from Dr. King. And he quoted him. And these were words that a 27-year-old Dr. Martin Luther King uttered after his family home had been bombed. And he stood in front of a crowd that was angry about the bombing. They were angry about racial injustice. And he said, we are going to love our enemies. And he said, if I am stopped, the movement will not stop. If I'm stopped, our work will not stop. For what we are doing is right, what we are doing is just, and God is with us. Movements endure because people like us in this room, we find common values. Movements endure when we find common cause. Movements endure when we find community. So you honor Dr. King by being here today. and your ongoing daily commitment to a more just world. May our hearts be full of peace, love, and fierce resolve. Thank you.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Could we all stand together for our last congregational song? You should have received it in your programs. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. The Lord will see us through. The Lord will see us through. The Lord will see us through. The Lord will see us through someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We're almost there. Last one. The truth shall make us free. The truth shall make us free. The truth shall make us free. The truth shall make us free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe. We're going to repeat this part right here. That we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Watch the director. We shall overcome.